What's the most disturbing secret you've discovered about someone close to you? Story 1. The final 24 hours of my father's life were heartbreaking. Diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, he was admitted to the ER and quickly transferred to the ICU. Due to strict hospital COVID regulations, my mom, sister, and I weren't allowed to be with him. We sent messages and called throughout the day, but he never responded. A nurse told us he was awake and communicative, which offered some hope. Tragically, he passed away at 3:30 a.m., and by the time we were allowed to see him, he was already unconscious. Later, while my mom rested, I began organizing his cremation and looked through his belongings. His phone was among them. Hoping for comfort, I reread our final messages, only to realize none had been opened. Then I found a chat app with one contact, a young woman. They had exchanged intimate messages until his final hours. A week later, I contacted her. She was 19 and they'd been in a relationship since she was 17. He had been her bus driver. My father was 66. Knowing he spent his last moments with her shattered my view of him and left me with a truth I'll carry forever. Story 2. She was my best friend for 7 years. We were inseparable, and when I moved out of state, she begged my husband and me to return. We didn't have strong ties elsewhere, so we moved back. At first, everything felt perfect. She joined us for dinners, we laughed constantly. But over time, subtle changes crept in. She began inserting herself into our disagreements, texting us separately and validating each side to stir resentment. She even suggested I consider her as a backup plan if my marriage failed, imagining a life where we lived together. Meanwhile, she told my husband she longed for a child that looked like him and hinted that she just needed a sperm donor. Eventually, we compared messages and realized how manipulative she had been. When confronted, she denied it all and became aggressive, showing up at our home uninvited and banging on our door. The situation escalated to the point we had to move and change our numbers. It's terrifying to realize the person I trusted like family had such unhealthy, obsessive feelings. That chapter of my life taught me hard lessons about trust, boundaries, and how love can twist into something dangerous. Story 3. After my great-uncle passed away, our family started clearing out his attic. Among old furniture and boxes, we discovered a locked chest filled with photographs and documents from his time in the Ku Klux Klan. He had been a grand wizard. Inside were images of rallies, cross burnings, and even lynchings, all from rural Alabama. We were horrified. His behavior toward his black hospice nurse, once brushed off as grumpy old age, suddenly made tragic sense. Overcome with shame, the family chose to burn the evidence. I was just 16 and had no say, but the adults felt it was necessary to sever all ties with his hateful past. We held prayer vigils through our church and removed his gravestone to prevent any chance of glorifying him. He was erased from our family records. The discovery clashed painfully with our family's legacy. Our ancestors had participated in the Underground Railroad and civil rights marches. It's a truth that burdens us still, one we try to reconcile by living with compassion and accountability. His legacy is not ours, but it reminds us how easily darkness can hide in what we think we know. Story 4. A family member of mine has made some deeply unsettling comments over the years about a notorious murder case in the Midwest, one involving victims allegedly fed to pigs. Though the murderers were caught, little physical evidence, particularly remains, was ever recovered. This relative, who worked at a slaughterhouse owned by someone with a shady reputation, often speaks about the case in hushed, serious tones. They never say anything outright incriminating, but their demeanor suggests they might know more than they're letting on. Their eerie fascination with the crime, combined with their detailed knowledge of pig processing, has always left me uneasy. At dinner, they'd casually recount disturbing details of animal slaughter, especially involving pigs, and seem to enjoy making others uncomfortable. While it's possible they're simply obsessed with true crime or local rumors, part of me wonders if there's a darker reason behind their cryptic remarks. I've thought about asking them more directly, but something always stops me. Maybe they're just playing into the mystique. Or maybe it's better not to know the truth. Story 5. My best friend of 25 years once told me, with a strange sense of pride, that they believed they were a sociopath. They blurted out, "I don't give a damn about anyone but myself," and laughed as if it were a joke. At first, I brushed it off, trying to remind them of times they'd shown care. But as time passed and life grew more complicated, I began to see the truth of their words. They were manipulative, emotionally abusive, and surrounded themselves with toxic people. These individuals, some of the worst I've ever met, would try to ruin your life if you crossed them. Over the years, the emotional manipulation chipped away at me. Passive-aggressive jabs, guilt-tripping, and controlling behavior became the norm. Eventually, I realized I had been entangled in an abusive friendship for decades. There was no sudden breaking point, just a slow awakening. When I finally cut ties, it felt like removing a slow drip of poison. The healing has taken time, but I feel lighter, clearer, and finally free. Letting go of someone I once loved was painful, but it was the only way to reclaim my life. Story 6. On my mom's side of the family, trauma is often turned into entertainment. Horrific events are retold as humorous anecdotes, usually at holiday gatherings. It's their way of coping, I suppose, but even as a kid, it felt deeply unsettling. Stories of my grandfather trying to shoot my grandmother in front of the kids, or my mom being beaten for saying Billy D. Williams was attractive, were shared like party jokes. The truly dark events, the ones too horrifying to laugh about, were buried instead. One day, my grandmother casually mentioned that my grandfather had been in the KKK. She said he had participated in lynchings and was proud of his skill. I also learned that the only reason I saw him as a child was because he knew where my mom lived. He had no contact with his other children's families. Looking back, his house always had a chilling atmosphere I couldn't explain. Everything now makes sense. The eerie silence, the strange behaviors, the kids playing with dead rats like dolls. It wasn't just odd. It was deeply dysfunctional. And I'm only now beginning to process just how disturbing it all was. Story 7. My husband and I spent 2 years teaching in rural Alaska. A unique, challenging experience. We became close with a colleague, an older man who took on an uncle-like role. He welcomed us often, shared meals, and even let us stay at his home during a city trip. In our second year, he introduced us to a teenage girl he claimed was his niece. She lived with him and said she was finishing high school online, having moved out from her father's home. The story seemed believable, and she confirmed it to me and others. Months later, she vanished. He said she reconciled with her father and left. But the truth emerged later. She wasn't his niece. She was an underage girl he had groomed online. Her father tracked her down after she contacted a local woman for help. A state trooper escorted her home. The man was arrested and later caught again in an FBI sting for attempting to lure another minor. Someone we trusted and considered a friend turned out to be a predator. It was one of the most disturbing betrayals I've ever experienced. Story 8. I have minimal contact with my extended family, and honestly, I'm fine with that. Over time, they've shown themselves to be indifferent and self-serving. I only keep close ties with my parents and one brother. The rest? Irrelevant. Years ago, my father was treated terribly by his own siblings. When my grandfather passed, his estate, meant to support my dad, was redirected to others after my step-grandfather inherited everything. Despite it being my grandmother's wish to care for her son, the money and house were seized by people who didn't lift a finger to earn them. Later, those same relatives reached out, suggesting we let bygones be bygones. I refused. They had profited from injustice and betrayed my father's trust. I've never forgiven them, and I won't. They chose greed over family. Now, they live off that stolen inheritance while my dad, the intended recipient, was left behind. I've learned the hard way that not everyone with your blood deserves a place in your life. Story 9. My father's life was built on lies and infidelity. He cheated on my brother's mom with mine, though she didn't know at the time. They married, and I was born on their first anniversary. But his betrayal didn't stop there. He continued cheating throughout their marriage. Even when visiting his dying mother, he found time to sneak off and meet other women. After divorcing my mom, he remarried in Mexico to someone the same age as my older brother. Years later, in 2011, he suffered a fatal heart attack while driving. Somehow, he managed to pull over safely before dying. As my brother and I sorted through his things, we found his phone filled with messages to other women. Contacts saved under names like boss and lawyer. He was cheating on his current wife too. We deleted everything before returning the phone. He was unfaithful until the end. A scumbag, yes, but I've heard his past was troubled. That, however, is a story for another time. Story 10. Around 6 or 7 years ago, I was desperate for housing. My flat was being renovated, and I had nowhere to go. I posted a roommate ad, and a guy I vaguely knew from anime conventions responded. We chatted before and had mutual friends, so I agreed to meet him over dinner. During the meal, he casually mentioned experiencing blackouts. Episodes where he'd wake up with no memory and once found blood on his hands. I acted nonchalant but mentally decided I couldn't live with him. Weeks later, whispers surfaced about an incident involving him at a convention. No one shared details due to an ongoing investigation. Years passed, and I forgot about it, until someone messaged me, urging me to unfriend him. He had been convicted of violently raping a girl at knife point during a convention. The police found a bag with rope, duct tape, and a knife, premeditated tools. Chillingly, he admitted the victim wasn't his intended target. His true goal had been someone he believed had led him on. The realization that someone I had shared laughs with was capable of such horror still makes my skin crawl. Story 11. A childhood friend once confided something that stayed with me for years. While heavily pregnant with her third child, she admitted to sleeping with her boyfriend's best friend during a drunken night. At first, I dismissed it as a one-time mistake. But when her baby was born, with blue eyes and ginger hair, unlike her previous 2 children or their parents, I couldn't help but notice the resemblance to the friend, not the boyfriend. She had a history of drinking too much and poor judgment, so in some ways I wasn't shocked. I urged her to tell him, but she refused. Their relationship was already strange. They didn't live together and he contributed little to raising the kids. Around the time of the baby's birth, his father died, further complicating things. No paternity test was ever done, and I eventually lost touch with them. I don't condone cheating, but I stayed silent, feeling it wasn't my place. Sometimes I wonder if the truth ever came out, or if it'll remain buried forever. It's a secret that still lingers in the back of my mind. Story 12. This isn't disturbing, but it's one of the most surprising things I've ever learned about my family. My great-grandfather, who passed away when I was about 8, never spoke about his time in the military. We knew he had served in World War I after lying about his age at 17, and that his injuries left him in a wheelchair. But details about his service were a mystery. After he died, my parents found a box among his belongings containing a Victoria Cross, the highest British military honor for bravery. None of us had ever seen it or heard him speak of it. Curious, we did some research and discovered he'd received the award for heroism during the Battle of the Somme. He'd saved lives under heavy fire, but never told a soul. Not his wife, children, or grandchildren. I imagine the experience was too painful to revisit, and he didn't seek recognition. He was just a quiet man who believed he'd done what anyone would. That kind of humility is rare. Learning about it made me admire him even more. He never sought praise. He simply carried his burdens in silence. Story 13. About 10 years ago, when I was 27, I discovered a massive family secret. My mother had been married before and had a daughter, Claire. I had no idea she existed. Around the same time, I also learned that my oldest brother, Sam, wasn't my full sibling. He was from that same first marriage. It all came out when Claire messaged my other brother, Peter, on Facebook, claiming to be our half-sister. Peter was furious, and when he confronted our parents, they finally admitted the truth. My mom had completely cut Claire out of her life, while Sam, who had always seemed distant, had been tolerated but never truly accepted. Claire had run away several times before being taken in by our grandmother, someone we barely knew because my mother avoided her. The betrayal stung. My parents claimed they were protecting us, but it felt more like they were hiding their shame. I've never fully forgiven them. I now live 2 hours away. They never visit, yet expect me to return every Christmas. Their texts still make me anxious. Writing this brings up so many emotions, but it's also a strange relief to finally express it. Story 14. My younger brother shocked our entire family when we learned he had been having an affair with his girlfriend's mom. They even called each other mom and son before the truth came out. The girlfriend had walked in on them in bed. It didn't end there. He was later kicked out of the army after her father, who was an army chaplain, reported the affair. Apparently, my brother had already been warned multiple times, and this was the final straw. Years earlier, he had dropped out of high school and moved in with his girlfriend's family. My parents were concerned, but after a counselor warned that resisting might push him towards self-harm, they reluctantly agreed. After the fallout, we discovered he had stolen from us personal items and letters filled with resentment. He called me a lonely loser and swore off contact with everyone except me. Now married to his ex-girlfriend's mother, he works at Home Depot and is considering trade school. Despite cutting us off, he's apparently bitter that my parents haven't reached out. Our family is still reeling. None of it makes sense, and we're left with a mess we never saw coming. Story 15. When I was in 8th grade, my dad started his own business. Around the same time, my grandfather attempted suicide and was kept on life support for 6 months before passing away. My dad always told me that this tragedy caused our financial collapse. Bankruptcy, selling the car, and moving to a small apartment. I believed him for years. His story inspired me to support suicide prevention causes, thinking I understood firsthand how such loss could unravel a family. But after my dad passed away, I found documents that told a very different story. He had been sued by a female employee for sexual harassment. After she filed a complaint, he fired her in retaliation. She sued, won, and the legal costs destroyed his business. The lawsuit happened just before my grandfather's death. Suddenly, the narrative I'd believed my whole life crumbled. It's hard to reconcile the father I thought I knew with the man behind those legal papers. His lies shaped my understanding of our family's struggles, and learning the truth years later was deeply painful. It wasn't just grief, it was deception buried under grief. Story 16. For over 2 decades, I believed my dad hated me. He barely spoke to me unless he was yelling. We'd sit across the dinner table in silence, while he showered my brother with affection and warmth. I hated him for it, but I also hated that I hated him. It tore me up inside. I spent years wondering what I'd done wrong. Then, when I was 23, my grandmother, who had always been more of a mother to me, told me the truth. The man I called Dad wasn't my biological father. My real dad had left before I was born, and Mom met her husband when I was just a baby. Once my brother, his biological son, was born, he couldn't hide his resentment toward me. I was relieved to finally understand, but also embarrassed. Friends had asked if he was really my dad based on how he treated me. I'd always defended him. Now I know I was defending a lie. My mom never told me, even as his coldness crushed me. That silence left scars. I'm still working through the trust issues it created. Story 17. In 2010, my brother and I spent the summer with our grandmother. A few weeks after we returned home, she called, furious, accusing me of stealing $7,000 from her safe. I had no idea what she was talking about. Thankfully, my mom believed me and stood up for me. But my grandmother wouldn't budge. She cut me off completely, forbidding me from ever entering her home again. She told the family I was dead to her. 7 years passed before we spoke again. She only reached out after I had my first child. Then, early this year, I found out the truth. It was my brother who had stolen the money. She had discovered this back in 2011, less than a year after it happened. But she never confronted him, never demanded the money back, and never apologized to me. Even worse, everyone on my dad's side of the family knew. They let me carry the blame while welcoming my brother with open arms. I was punished for something I didn't do, and no one said a word. That betrayal still burns. I don't know if I'll ever fully recover from it. Story 18. My cousin once had a football scholarship and a promising future. He gave it up to stand by his girlfriend after she accused the star quarterback of raping her. When the school investigated and dismissed the case, he dropped out in protest. They had a baby, and a few years later, she admitted it was all a lie. She had cheated and didn't want to admit it. Not long after, she left him, saying she felt she had missed out on fun by settling down too young. While she partied, he raised their child alone. Eventually, she returned, and despite everything, he took her back. It got worse. She accused him of domestic violence using fake evidence. Photos altered to show injuries on different sides of her face. The case was thrown out, but not before his parents spent over $100,000 to defend him. When they asked for help repaying it, the couple cut off all contact. Now they're expecting another child. She claims she's ready to settle down again. It's heartbreaking to see how much his loyalty has cost him. His future, his parents' money, and likely his peace of mind. Story 19. I spent 10 years with my ex, raising his children and having one of our own. 18 months after we separated, I learned he'd been cheating for nearly the entire relationship. 2 years in, he began an affair with another mom from our kids' school. I worked there too as a teacher and counselor. He told everyone I was just the live-in nanny, not his partner. The entire community knew. My coworkers, friends, and even the children kept the secret. When I reached out to the other woman, she said she confronted him after we publicly announced my pregnancy. He brushed it off, claiming we'd only just gotten together. He took his kids on holidays with her, posed for family photos, and kept me completely in the dark. 4 years in, he proposed while still married to his first wife. He later admitted it all. I blamed myself for not seeing the signs, but now I understand, it wasn't my fault. Trusting your partner isn't foolish. He betrayed that trust. That's on him, not me. Story 20. When I was around 15, my cousins moved in with us. Their father had remarried a woman who was abusive, so my mom took them in. Over time, one cousin was asked to leave, and it was just me, my mom, my siblings, and my cousin S. Then my mom started dating someone. C. He was kind, funny, and quickly became part of our family. He even came to my school plays. S and I shared a room. One night, while she was staying at her mom's, I noticed something stuffed in her pillowcase. It was C's shirt and a belt. I knew she kept a diary, so I looked. What I read broke me. S had been sleeping with C, my mom's partner, for months. She was 17. He was 41. That was 14 years ago. They stayed together for years, but recently she's heartbroken. He betrayed her too. Meanwhile, he's moved on. The betrayal cut deep. My mom gave us a home, and she repaid her by stealing the man she loved. I haven't forgiven either of them. Story 21. When my older brother started dating my best friend, I felt weird about it. She was 16, he was 19, and she was nervous I'd be upset. I tried to support them because they were both lonely and seemed to connect. At first, everything seemed okay, but there were small red flags. She claimed to love our hobbies but never joined in. Then she said she broke up with him because her parents didn't approve. She seemed proud of herself for ending it. But later, I found out she'd sent him a very cold message saying he was boring and that their relationship never mattered. He was crushed. Not long after, she ghosted me and another close friend. Her family started acting distant, and her mom began posting cryptic things online. A year passed before she finally reached out. She told me my brother had been manipulating her, saying I talked badly about her and that he was the only one she could trust. Couldn't believe it. My own brother had sabotaged one of my deepest friendships just to control her. It was a betrayal I never saw coming. Story 22. Back in university, I was part of a really close group of friends who cared a lot about community and helping people in need. When a coworker of mine was kicked out of her home for being gay, I introduced her to the group and even got my mom to let her stay in our house rent-free for a while. Not long after, my mom called and said something felt off. When she asked the girl to move out, things exploded. The girl accused my mom of being intolerant, and most of my friends immediately took her side. But when I came home, I saw the truth. My room was trashed, dishes everywhere, garbage bags piled up. My mom revealed that the girl had been using substances, yelling at her and acting out. While cleaning, I found checks made out to her late grandmother. She had been forging them to buy expensive art supplies. Turns out, she wasn't kicked out for being gay, but for stealing from her dying grandmother. We reported the fraud, but most of my friends never believed us. It was a painful reminder that not every sad story is as it seems. Story 23. A few years ago, I was living with my then-boyfriend, and one night he shared something that shook me to my core. Out of nowhere, he said he had hurt someone who had harmed his sister. I didn't know if it was true or just said to scare me, but either way, it frightened me. Later, while using his computer to find a game, I stumbled across disturbing files, how-to guides on hiding evidence, creating harmful devices, and even an old infamous document that's been banned in many places. I confronted him, telling him I felt unsafe. His response, "I don't care about you, myself, or anyone." That was the last straw. I ended things right then and asked him to move out. Shortly after, my cat went missing. I'll never know if it was related, but it still haunts me. Years later, a stray cat wandered into my yard. I gave him a piece of steak and he never left. He's been my little companion ever since. A small comfort after a very dark chapter in my life. Story 24. My uncle is one of the kindest, funniest people I know. He's like a second dad to me. He even learned to play Minecraft at age 60 just to bond with his nephew. Everyone in our family adores him. But one day, my mom sat me down and told me about his past. As a teen, he was incredibly cruel to her. At 17, he committed a serious crime and ended up in prison. While there, he was attacked and disfigured. After that, he disappeared for 20 years. No one knew if he was alive. He later told us he lived with a biker gang and even returned to prison for another offense. It wasn't until his release, after a major gang crackdown, that he finally felt safe to start over. He got married, reconnected with my mom, and became the loving man I've always known. Most of our extended family doesn't know his full past. To me, he's a reminder that people can change. He went from a life of violence to becoming the heart of our family. I'm proud of the man he is today. He told us the police had taken his phone and computer because he had looked up inappropriate material involving minors. He claimed he never hurt anyone and said he couldn't afford therapy. So this was his outlet. My partner and I were stunned. We didn't know what to say. After he left, we talked and agreed we couldn't be around him anymore. We asked him to leave the group and cut contact. The worst part? He had a young child of his own. For weeks, I felt unsettled knowing he had been in our home. We didn't tell the rest of the group, he'd asked us not to, but I've always wondered if we made the right choice. It was a harsh lesson. Sometimes people hide truly troubling things behind a friendly face. Story 26. There was an older Croatian man in our community who was known for being incredibly generous. He helped immigrant families find work, gave them housing, and even taught English. Everyone admired him. But what most didn't know was that his past was incredibly dark. My grandmother told me he had once served in a violent army during World War II. He and a friend had stumbled upon a stash of stolen gold, escaped the country, and made it to Canada. Here, he used the money to start a new life. When his friend passed away, he inherited even more. Overwhelmed with guilt, he spent the rest of his life helping others, hoping to make up for what he had done. He never married or had kids. He never returned to Croatia. At his funeral, dozens of families came to thank him for helping them rebuild their lives. My grandmother once hinted she had feelings for him, but stayed loyal to my grandfather. His story reminds me that people can carry heavy pasts while still doing good. Sometimes redemption comes in quiet, everyday acts. Story 27. My parents used to live in a quiet rural neighborhood. One couple, a sweet elderly pair, lived a few houses down. The husband often helped neighbors with errands, including giving my younger sister a ride to the bus stop. One day they just disappeared. Their garden was overgrown, the truck sat untouched, and even their cats started showing up at other homes. People grew concerned and contacted authorities. Police said they had been in an accident and were recovering. A month later, they returned. The husband was in a wheelchair and barely spoke. The wife had scars on her face and neck but avoided questions. Eventually, we learned the truth. The husband had suffered a mental health crisis and attacked his wife. He stabbed her 16 times. She survived, called their son, and got them both to a hospital. She never told anyone what happened. She didn't want the community to judge him or treat him differently. It's hard to believe something so tragic happened just a few houses away. They lived out their final years in peace, but they carried a heavy secret no one expected. Story 28. In my mid-20s, I was visiting my best friend in prison. He was serving time for causing a tragic accident, but he had shown remorse and was trying to move forward. I often traveled to visit him with his fiancée, who always talked about how much she loved him and couldn't wait for him to come home. On one trip, she left her phone in the car while grabbing snacks. A message popped up that made my stomach drop. It was clearly from someone else she was romantically involved with. I didn't tell him right away. He'd just lost his mom and was already struggling. I didn't want to add to his pain. He found out shortly after his release, just 2 weeks before their wedding. She left him and they lost their entire venue deposit. Turns out she had been seeing someone else the whole time he was in prison, maybe even before. Watching someone go through so much heartbreak, especially after trying so hard to rebuild, was devastating. He deserved better. Story 29. In high school, I had to move out because of issues at home. A friend's family took me in, and I stayed with them for the rest of the year. One night, a group of us were hanging out in the woods, just talking and sharing stories. One friend told us about how his brother died while unknowingly helping someone cover up a crime. It was heavy. Then my host friend shared something just as shocking. His dad had planned to leave their mom after reconnecting with an old college flame. One night, while the kids were watching TV, they heard strange noises upstairs. At first, they thought their parents were laughing, until they heard a scream. They ran up and found their father severely injured. Their mom had attacked him with an axe and a knife. The story shook me. I had never been so close to something that intense. I stayed quiet and respectful for the rest of my time there. It was a powerful reminder that everyone has battles you can't always see. Story 30. I used to go to festivals with a fun group of friends. One guy, let's call him Jay, was someone I only saw at events. He was friendly, funny, and always a good time to be around. Then someone in our group chat shared a news article. The name and photo looked like Jay, but it used his full name. At first, we thought he'd been in a car accident. But as more details came out, we realized it wasn't an accident. He had crashed his car on purpose while being followed by police. Jay had been under investigation for some very serious crimes involving children. Authorities linked him to a trafficking ring and even a murder case overseas. We were stunned. None of us had seen it coming. We had danced, laughed, and taken selfies with someone capable of horrible things. It was a harsh wake-up call. You never really know who someone is. Even now, thinking about it makes my skin crawl. Story 25. There was an older Croatian man in our community who was known for being incredibly generous. He helped immigrant families find work, gave them housing, and even taught English. Everyone admired him. But what most didn't know was that his past was incredibly dark. My grandmother told me he had once served in a violent army during World War II. He and a friend had stumbled upon a stash of stolen gold, escaped the country, and made it to Canada. Here, he used the money to start a new life. When his friend passed away, he inherited even more. Overwhelmed with guilt, he spent the rest of his life helping others, hoping to make up for what he had done. He never married or had kids. He never returned to Croatia. At his funeral, dozens of families came to thank him for helping them rebuild their lives. My grandmother once hinted she had feelings for him, but stayed loyal to my grandfather. His story reminds me that people can carry heavy pasts while still doing good. Sometimes redemption comes in quiet, everyday acts. Story 26. My parents used to live in a quiet rural neighborhood. One couple, a sweet elderly pair, lived a few houses down. The husband often helped neighbors with errands, including giving my younger sister a ride to the bus stop. One day they just disappeared. Their garden was overgrown, the truck sat untouched, and even their cats started showing up at other homes. People grew concerned and contacted authorities. Police said they had been in an accident and were recovering. A month later, they returned. The husband was in a wheelchair and barely spoke. The wife had scars on her face and neck but avoided questions. Eventually, we learned the truth. The husband had suffered a mental health crisis and attacked his wife. He stabbed her 16 times. She survived, called their son, and got them both to a hospital. She never told anyone what happened. She didn't want the community to judge him or treat him differently. It's hard to believe something so tragic happened just a few houses away. They lived out their final years in peace, but they carried a heavy secret no one expected. Story 27. In my mid-20s, I was visiting my best friend in prison. He was serving time for causing a tragic accident, but he had shown remorse and was trying to move forward. I often traveled to visit him with his fiancée, who always talked about how much she loved him and couldn't wait for him to come home. On one trip, she left her phone in the car while grabbing snacks. A message popped up that made my stomach drop. It was clearly from someone else she was romantically involved with. I didn't tell him right away. He'd just lost his mom and was already struggling. I didn't want to add to his pain. He found out shortly after his release, just 2 weeks before their wedding. She left him and they lost their entire venue deposit. Turns out she had been seeing someone else the whole time he was in prison, maybe even before. Watching someone go through so much heartbreak, especially after trying so hard to rebuild, was devastating. He deserved better. Story 28. In high school, I had to move out because of issues at home. A friend's family took me in, and I stayed with them for the rest of the year. One night, a group of us were hanging out in the woods, just talking and sharing stories. One friend told us about how his brother died while unknowingly helping someone cover up a crime. It was heavy. Then my host friend shared something just as shocking. His dad had planned to leave their mom after reconnecting with an old college flame. One night, while the kids were watching TV, they heard strange noises upstairs. At first, they thought their parents were laughing, until they heard a scream. They ran up and found their father severely injured. Their mom had attacked him with an axe and a knife. The story shook me. I had never been so close to something that intense. I stayed quiet and respectful for the rest of my time there. It was a powerful reminder that everyone has battles you can't always see. Story 29. I used to go to festivals with a fun group of friends. One guy, let's call him Jay, was someone I only saw at events. He was friendly, funny, and always a good time to be around. Then someone in our group chat shared a news article. The name and photo looked like Jay, but it used his full name. At first, we thought he'd been in a car accident. But as more details came out, we realized it wasn't an accident. He had crashed his car on purpose while being followed by police. Jay had been under investigation for some very serious crimes involving children. Authorities linked him to a trafficking ring and even a murder case overseas. We were stunned. None of us had seen it coming. We had danced, laughed, and taken selfies with someone capable of horrible things. It was a harsh wake-up call. You never really know who someone is. Even now, thinking about it makes my skin crawl. Story 30. At my previous job, my boss was a kind woman. Caring, funny, and always had her coffee cup in hand, often with a bit too much wine in it. She knew I had gone through a rough time with my ex, so one evening after work, she opened up about something incredibly personal. She told me she hadn't taken time off the previous year for a health issue, as we had believed. The real reason: her ex had hurt her badly, physically and emotionally. She became pregnant after the assault and, out of fear, decided to keep it secret, give birth alone, and place the child for adoption. She said the baby looked just like him, and she was terrified he'd find out. The next day, she acted as if the conversation never happened. I never brought it up again. Now, when I see her at work events or hear people asking when she'll start a family, I see the pain behind her polite smile. She carries a story no one else knows, and it changed how I see her forever. Story 31. I once worked with someone who convinced everyone around them they had cancer. We all rallied behind them, helped with rides, raised money for treatment, and even supported a fundraiser that collected over $50,000. They said they were going to the US for a final treatment. We believed them. Their partner even rushed a wedding so they could be married before it was too late. It felt like something out of a movie. But none of it was true. An investigation revealed they had faked the illness entirely. The trip to America? Just a vacation. The hospital visits? Completely made up. Everyone was heartbroken, not just because of the lies, but because we genuinely cared. Friends, co-workers, even their kids had believed it. They were eventually charged with fraud. It's still hard to process. How could someone carry on such a huge lie for so long, and to so many people who cared? It taught me a lesson I never expected. Sometimes the biggest betrayals come from the people you trust the most. Story 32. My mom passed away 3 years ago at 48. After she died, we were given some of her things, old journals, notebooks, and little keepsakes. I didn't expect to find anything shocking, but what I read broke me. She had written about being hurt in ways we never knew. Being physically abused, burned with hot food, and even experiencing something deeply traumatic while she was sick. None of us knew. I always thought I was her favorite. She'd light up when I visited and cry when I left, even though I lived just 10 miles away. I thought it was love. Maybe it was also relief. Maybe she felt safe when I was there. I wish she had told me. I would have done anything to protect her. I'm her firstborn. I would have stood in front of anything for her. Now I carry that weight with me. Knowing what she went through alone makes me feel like I failed her, without ever even knowing. Story 33. Growing up, I was told my grandmother died in a robbery gone wrong. She had been working with law enforcement and supposedly, the people who tried to rob her discovered that and took her life. That was the story we all believed until recently. After my great-grandparents passed away, my mom was sorting through their things and found out the truth. My grandmother had been struggling mentally. One day, she locked my mom and aunt in another room for a nap, and while they were asleep, she took her own life. My grandfather found her when he got home. It was the 1980s, and back then, mental health wasn't something people talked about openly. The family made up the robbery story to protect her memory, and maybe themselves. After her passing, my aunt went to live with her biological dad, and my mom stayed with their father, who sadly passed away a few years later. Now, as adults, my mom and aunt are reconnecting and slowly unpacking the truth. It's heartbreaking to realize how much pain was hidden behind the story we were told. Changes everything, but it also explains so much. Story 34. When I was 10, I told my cousin a secret. I had a crush on one of our classmates. We laughed about it and Pinky swore never to tell. A few weeks later, the entire school knew. I was embarrassed, but I got over it. What I didn't get over was what happened years later. I was 17, and my cousin started dating that same classmate. I remembered the betrayal from middle school, but I kept quiet. Then she told me, "You were just a kid. He never liked you anyway." That sentence stung more than anything else. I realized then that she had always seen me as competition, not family. She could have dated anyone, but she chose him, and she wanted me to know it. We drifted apart after that. She sent me a wedding invitation years later. I didn't go. Some people don't stab you in the back. They smile while doing it to your face. Story 35. I used to volunteer at a local shelter, mostly folding clothes and organizing food donations. One evening, a man came in, quiet, polite, no drama. We chatted briefly while I handed him some supplies. Weeks later, I saw his photo on the news. He'd been arrested for a violent crime committed just days after I saw him. I froze. It seemed normal. What stuck with me most was something he had said. You never really know what someone's carrying. At the time, I thought he meant emotional burdens. Now I think he meant something far darker. I told the shelter staff. They were shaken but unsurprised. Many people come and go, and not everyone wants help. I still volunteer, but I look at people differently now. I try not to judge, but I also trust my gut more. The scariest people don't always look scary. Sometimes they say thank you, take a blanket, and walk into the night like anyone else. Story 36. My stepdad was always the fun parent. He made pancakes on weekends, let us stay up late, and never raised his voice. Compared to my strict mom, he was a breeze. When I turned 14, his attention shifted. Compliments became comments. Hugs lingered a little too long. I didn't say anything at first. Who would believe me? He was such a good guy. One day I told my mom. She looked at me, eyes wide, and said, "Don't lie about something that serious." The next week, she left her phone on the table while doing laundry. A message popped up from my stepdad. It read, "She's starting to catch on." That night, she packed our bags and we moved into a motel. She never explained, but she never doubted me again. He was gone from our lives after that, but I still think about how close I came to being ignored forever. Sometimes, the scariest thing isn't the predator. It's the silence that protects them. Story 37. In college, I had a roommate who was obsessively clean. She'd scrub the bathroom daily, labeled all her food, and color-coded our cleaning schedule. I thought she was just type A. Then I noticed she never slept. I'd come home at 3 a.m. and find her vacuuming. She never ate with me, and she whispered to herself constantly. One night, I woke up to her standing at the foot of my bed, just staring. I asked what she was doing. She smiled and said, "Just making sure you're still breathing." I moved out the next morning. A few weeks later, I saw her photo online. She had been committed after trying to cleanse her new roommate with bleach. I think about that night often. I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't woken up, or if I had stayed another week. You never really know who you're living with until it's too late. Story 38. My brother and I used to be close. We'd play video games late into the night, share secrets, and cover for each other when we got into trouble. Then he started dating someone new. She was charming, funny, and smart. We all liked her until we didn't. He stopped calling. Family dinners became tense. He'd flinch when someone raised their voice. One night, he showed up at my door with a black eye and no explanation. Eventually, he admitted she was hurting him emotionally and physically. He didn't leave her. He said, "She only does it when I really mess up." It broke my heart. I always thought I'd be the one protecting him, but I couldn't save him from this. They're married now. She smiles in every photo. He rarely does. Sometimes the people we love don't need heroes. They need a way out, and it's not always a door we can open for them. Story 39. When I worked night shifts at a gas station, I'd see the same man every Saturday around 2 a.m. He never bought anything, just walked in, nodded, and left. One night I asked if he needed help. He looked me in the eye and said, "You're the only person who's ever asked." After that, he began bringing me small gifts, candy, old books, a drawing he said reminded him of me. I was flattered until he started staying longer, watching me, asking personal questions. One night, he reached over the counter and touched my hair. I froze. My manager reviewed the cameras and banned him. We even filed a report, but since he hadn't technically done anything illegal, nothing came of it. I quit that job a week later. Story 40. A friend from high school once told me I was the only person who ever truly listened to him. I took that seriously. We stayed in touch for years, even when we drifted from the rest of our group. One night, he called me crying. He said he'd done something terrible. He wouldn't say what, only that someone's life is ruined because of me. The next day, he deleted all his social media. Weeks passed. I searched for his name online, hoping to see a sign that he was okay. Eventually, I found it, but not what I wanted. He had been arrested for hacking into a classmate's personal accounts and sharing private photos. He was charged with multiple offenses. I still think about that last call. I wonder if he was trying to confess or get sympathy. Maybe both. It's hard to accept that someone you trusted could hurt others so deeply. But sometimes, the truth isn't yours to fix. It's just yours to live with. Story 41. When I was in middle school, our neighbor was an older woman named Miss Janet. She baked cookies for the kids, gave out full-size candy bars on Halloween, and always had a kind word to share. One afternoon, while helping her carry groceries, I noticed photos on her mantel. Lots of kids, none of whom I recognized. I asked if they were her grandchildren. She said, "They were all mine once." I didn't understand then. Years later, I found out the truth. Miss Janet had been a foster parent for decades, but several of her placements had ended in tragedy, neglect, even a fatal accident. After a major investigation, she lost her license. No charges were filed, but the stories left a stain. I still remember how kind she was to me. It's hard to reconcile the sweet woman I knew with the reports I later read. Sometimes people wear kindness like a mask, and sometimes we never get to know what truly lies underneath. Story 42. My cousin disappeared for 2 years. No messages, no social media, nothing. Then one day he walked into a family gathering like nothing had happened. He looked thinner, quieter, and had a tattoo he wouldn't explain. When I asked where he'd been, he said, "I was learning how to survive. That was it." Later that night, I overheard him and my uncle arguing. Something about the deal, and no one can ever know. Eventually, I pieced together that he had been involved in something illegal, possibly trafficking. Whether as a victim or participant, no one would say. He's back now, working a regular job, going to therapy. But sometimes he zones out like he's somewhere else entirely. We don't ask questions anymore. Maybe we're afraid of the answers. Not all stories get closure. Some just get quieter. Story 43. When I was about 8, I had an imaginary friend named Tommy. My parents thought it was cute until I started blaming him for everything. Broken glass, missing keys, even drawings on the wall. One night, my mom heard me whispering and peeked into my room. I was sitting in the corner, staring at the closet, saying, "I said I wouldn't tell." She thought I was dreaming. Years later, during renovations, we found something hidden in the closet wall. An old toy truck, a Polaroid, and a small, dusty shoe. The previous owners had lost a child. The boy's name? Thomas. I don't claim to believe in ghosts, but I haven't slept with the closet door open since. Some childhood memories stick not because they were sweet, but because they never made sense. Story 44. When I was 12, I found a shoebox under my dad's bed filled with newspaper articles. I thought it was some kind of collection, until I realized every article was about missing women. They were all from nearby towns, spanning almost a decade. Some were just clippings, others had notes in the margins, dates, names, crossed out words. I didn't understand what it meant. I asked him about it once, and he laughed, said he loved true crime, and was trying to write a book. That seemed plausible until I noticed many of the stories had never made it to national news. Years later, I tried to find those articles online. Most were gone, no digital trace. And I'll never forget what he said when I asked why he stopped writing. "The endings already happened. He passed away last year. I never found that shoebox again." I still don't know if he was a morbid collector or something else, but I've never stopped wondering. How well do we really know our parents? Story 45. At 17, I worked part-time at a funeral home. I mostly handled flowers and helped clean after services. One day, the director asked if I could help overnight. They'd had a delay with a body, and someone needed to stay. I agreed. It was quiet at first. But around midnight, I noticed something strange. The same man walked past the window 3 times, each time staring inside. He never knocked, never entered, just stared. Around 2 a.m., I heard a soft knock from inside the embalming room. I thought I imagined it until I heard it again. I went in. Nothing. But one of the drawers was slightly open. I closed it, locked up, and stayed near the exit until morning. The next day, the director just nodded and said, "You stayed the whole time." Most don't. He never explained what that meant. I never went back. But sometimes, when I can't sleep, I still hear that knock. What haunts me most isn't what I saw, but that quiet acknowledgement. Like he knew something I didn't. Story 46. My grandfather was a brilliant man, an inventor, a tinkerer. After he died, I found dozens of notebooks in his attic, filled with sketches and ideas. One was different. Titled The Listening Room, it detailed a device he had supposedly created that could pick up residual thoughts, mental echoes left behind in certain places. He claimed to have tested it in hospitals, cemeteries, even our own living room. His notes became increasingly frantic, filled with phrases like, "They're aware," and "Don't listen too long." I thought it was all fiction until I found the device. It looked like a radio with a single headphone jack and a hand-labeled dial. I tried it, just once. First, all I heard was static. Then whispers. Dozens of voices layered over each other. Some screaming, some crying, some just waiting. I yanked it off after 15 seconds. My ears rang for hours. I buried it in the woods. Deep. Sometimes I still wonder. If thoughts can echo? Who's doing the listening now? Story 47. When I was 9, I had a best friend named Erica. We played every day after school, mostly in the woods behind our neighborhood. One day, she told me she knew a shortcut to the creek. We walked deep into the trees, farther than I'd ever gone. Then she stopped and said, "This is where I died." I laughed, thinking she was joking, but her face didn't change. She pointed to a tree and said, "That's where they found me." I ran home crying. My parents said Erica had moved away a year before I even met her. Her family? Gone. No forwarding address. I went back once, years later. The tree was still there. Someone had carved initials into it. 1995. That was the year I started seeing her. I don't know what scares me more, that she was a ghost, or that I might have imagined an entire friendship. One that felt more real than anything else in my life. Story 48. In high school, I worked at an assisted living facility. Most residents were sweet, but one woman, Mildred, refused to speak. She just sat in her wheelchair, staring out the window. One night, during a storm, the power went out. I went to check on everyone. Mildred was missing. I found her in the hallway, standing. She hadn't walked in years. She looked at me and said, "He's in your room," then collapsed. When the lights came back, I rushed to my room. Everything looked normal, except for a muddy footprint on my bedsheet. Just one. Mildred passed away that night. Her final words never left me. Weeks later, another nurse told me Mildred had been institutionalized before, after claiming she could see people before they arrived. I moved out shortly after, but I still sleep with the light on. Not because I'm afraid of the dark, because I'm afraid of who's already there. Story 49. My uncle always told stories, wild, unbelievable ones. He said he'd once seen a man vanish in front of him, that he could smell lies, and that mirrors were windows, not reflections. We thought he was eccentric, until the day he died. He left me his mirror. Not a fancy one, just a small, old rectangle with strange etchings on the frame. I didn't hang it. I stored it in my closet. But occasionally, I'd find it resting against the wall, as if someone had taken it out. One night, I covered it with a blanket. The next morning, the blanket was folded neatly on the floor. Finally, I looked into it again. My reflection blinked twice when I didn't. I don't know what it is. I don't know what he gave me, but I haven't looked into that mirror since. And I never will again. Some gifts aren't meant to be kept. Story 50. My sister had an imaginary friend named Marla when she was little. She talked to her for hours, draw pictures of her, even set an extra plate at dinner. We all thought it was harmless. Then my sister started waking up with bruises. She said Marla was teaching her lessons. My parents thought she was hurting herself in her sleep. But one night, I walked past her room and heard two voices, hers and a much deeper one. I opened the door. She was alone. After that, she stopped speaking entirely. For 3 years. Years later, she told me she didn't stop because she couldn't. She stopped because Marla said if she told anyone, she'd go away forever. When I asked if that was a good thing, she said, "No." Marla kept the others away. I never asked what that meant. I don't think I want to know. Story 51. My childhood home had a locked room in the basement. My parents always said it was just storage, but they kept the key with them at all times. When I was 16, they left town for a weekend. I found the key. Of course, I opened the door. The room was empty, except for a chair, facing the wall, and a tape recorder on the floor. I pressed play. Static. Then a voice, my voice screaming. I don't remember recording it. I don't remember screaming like that, but it was definitely me. When my parents came home, I didn't mention it. That night, the recorder was gone. I've never asked about the room again. Some doors should stay closed, not because of what they hide, but because of what they might let back in. Story 52. I used to work as a night janitor at a museum. Quiet job. Peaceful. One night, I noticed something strange in the Egyptian exhibit. One of the sarcophagi had shifted slightly. I assumed another staff member had moved it. But over the next week, it kept happening. Just a few inches each night. Then, one evening, I heard knocking. From inside the sarcophagus. Soft. Rhythmic. I quit the next day. A few months later, I read that a new night guard had gone missing. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. His last shift? The Egyptian exhibit.